I wanted to talk about something that's probably been talked about to death at this point, but I figured maybe I could add a little bit of context into the discussion. Yes, that's right, as you all could have possibly imagined, especially on this channel. Dune Awakening. I want to talk about the change coming up in this game that is, I'm sure everybody has heard about nonstop at this point. I don't even play Dune Awakening. We have plenty of people in GII, in the garden, in the community in general who play it. We've got a channel on there. I'm going to jump in at some point. I just haven't gotten around to it. But they're making a change to their PvE and PvP gameplay based on community feedback after the first, 3, maybe 4 weeks of this game being out. And they made a big post here that I'm going to kind of skim through and give you some of the main things that I see. And then we're going to talk about how this relates to Star Citizen, because that is the conversation that is popping up. In fact, we could probably hop on over to the good old r/Reddit, r/Star Citizen, where, hey, look at that. The second post is the message. So let's dive into this post real quick, saying, hello, sleepers. I wanted to write something that acknowledges and addresses the comments around the endgame of Dune, while also providing context for what we were attempting. So let me start by stating this unequivocally. We want PvE players to be able to play the endgame and have access to the content of the endgame. Our goal is not to force PvE players to interact with the PvP system that they may not have interest in. Already off to a hot start. The fact that you have to, I understand that. That's a completely fine take. I believe that should probably be true for any game. Mark Twain once said, probably, no endgame plan survives first contact with the players. We still believe in the core concept of the deep desert, an endlessly renewing location that resets every week and creates an activity loop for great rewards. The tension of heading out there, head on a swivel, eyes peeled for foes as you enter the most dangerous part of the most dangerous planet in the universe. It makes sense. I mean, having it walled off also makes tons of sense because people are going to take that PvP elsewhere. But in terms of making it geographically based, that's kind of what Star Citizen is doing. It's just that they don't have anything to enforce that. And it's a choice between artificial walls or in-game systems, and the in-game systems don't exist. Let's drop down though here to the actual points that they lay out. The intended dynamic of Deep Desert PvP in Dune Awakening is that unless you really mess up, you always have the option to retreat in good order with whatever you're managed to claim so far. If you're smart and vigilant, you never have to fight if you don't want to. If you run, you'll have to call a halt to whatever task you were pursuing. But that should always be first. PvP should happen when both parties decide they want to fight over a location. That is pretty much how I think it's supposed to play out in Star Citizen 2. The idea that you shouldn't have to fight if you don't want to is 100% something I believe about in Star Citizen. That was the whole argument about master modes when they were working on that system. Balancing it so that obviously you have to make a decision to make sure you get away, but you need to make that decision smartly and well. And I do think that actually getting away should be something that you can mess up on and still get away. You should have to make mistakes in order to actually get caught in this game and killed. And I think that's the direction they're going on with the time to disable instead of time to kill, with lasers piercing shields and stuff instead of, taking out the whole ship. So I think you should be able to just get away. That should always be an easy thing to do, because at the end of the day, PvP should be something people are actually agreeing to. It's a danger. It's a deterrent. It keeps you away from certain places, and it attracts other people to certain places. But that's not always PvP. That's combat in general. I want to be scared of the NPCs too. There was one moment in Star Citizen so far in the Hathor locations when I finally was actually scared of the NPCs, and I was backpedaling, feeling like I was outnumbered and outplayed, and it was not going well. And that doesn't really happen often, but I feel like if that happens more in places, even by NPCs, people won't go as much, Either way, the differences between these two games are actually kind of big, I think, because this is more about a closed-off endgame location where you go in and you specifically are going there for the PvP and stuff. The problem people have is that there's stuff that was perceived as being exclusive to there. So it's like if CIG released a new sandbox activity and then locked all of the ship progression, getting new ships behind that activity. The other difference between these two games, though, is that one is finished and the other one is very far from being finished. So it's one thing to complain about the systems not working in Dune, which has seen its release and is ready to, you know, go full throttle as a full game, versus another game that has like maybe half of its features done. And really, the fact that they can even make these calls and balancing these things is something that Star Citizen doesn't have the luxury of doing. So this Landsrad that they're talking about, probably butchering that pronunciation, is an umbrella for all endgame activities. What form do those endgame activities take? More dungeons with bosses that drop endgame loot, more contracts that require specific tasks to be undertaken, more specialized delivery tasks that include components that cannot be stockpiled. If we ever add raids to the game, there will be tasks on the Landsrad to complete those raids. It's a framework that holds the endgame activities in place. And what they're saying about this is it should be doing that. Let's see. As a system, it is an activity driver that is designed to promote the conflict between the factions, internal politics between the guilds, while providing goal thresholds for individuals and groups to work together towards getting personal rewards. And it should be doing that for everyone who wants to participate in the Elder game, be that PvE or PvP. The Landsrad should be giving you things to do every day and every week. If nothing new from a design perspective, we've seen daily and weekly quest systems in game for a long time. Our approach was to try and frame this system around the greater politics of the Dune universe, by having players engage in activities to earn the votes of various Landsrad houses. Now, I'm not reading this in a ton of detail, and I very well might have missed it here. If anybody in chat can confirm for me, but I'm not actually seeing a change to the Deep Desert in terms of what gameplay is available. Like they're not moving the harvestables, are they? Let's see. Some areas of the Deep Desert will now be flagged as partial warfare areas where players will be able to explore testing stations and harvest T6 resources without the threat of conflict they may not want. Okay, I see. It's important to note that the top tier of the game is balanced around guilds and groups, so people will still find it grindy if they are playing solo. I see. Is that like a safe zone, like an armistice zone then? Okay, well, that's the change that Dune is making. And honestly, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be content for PvE players that isn't safe. Don't get me wrong. Okay, we need to have instanced areas that you can go into and know that you're not going to get interrupted. Absolutely. I agree with that. I'm talking more about the open world aspect of Star Citizen here, and they've got a lot that they've talked about it in the past. So I'm going to start from like one of the earliest. This is 10 for the Chairman, literally episode 1. 10 for the Chairman was one of the greatest vehicles for scope creep in Star Citizen's history. It ended fairly early because of that. But Chris Roberts got to talk all about his ideas back then, and a lot of them have changed since. So I'm going to show you the PvP slider here, and we're going to go from there, working our way up to present day, what they're saying about this kind of gameplay.
Ice asks, can you clarify the PvP slider? I see a lot of threads where people believe this affects the whole game, where I believe it to only affect the random encounters during the autopilot.
You know what? Let me take us back real quick, actually. This is not the right place to start on this topic. And I'm taking a little while to get to the gameplay, but I promise. Let's go back to the first explanation of how Star Citizen would work as a game. Now, the game has changed from this. Yeah, I'm recording. I'm recording. The game has changed from this, but when Star Citizen was first conceptualized, this is 2012, instancing was huge. Instancing was going to be a ton of different parts of this game. And so one of the things that they included in that was the idea that when you would go from place to place, you'd go out into space, you get loaded into a space instance, and that instance would then be compared to everybody else and sort of how you set your PvP desires, preferences, whatever. They describe it here.
Let's go.
Okay, I guess the text-to-speech works. That kind of freaked me out. So the way it works is that Persistent Universe Server, which we're calling the Galaxy Server, keeps track of all player assets, group relationships, and locations inside the Star Citizen universe. As the Galaxy Server isn't handling any real-time action, it can handle our complete player base, which right now would be about 45,000 players, but is designed to be scaled to millions if needed. The other key thing that the Galaxy Server does is dynamically place players based on their location, skill level, alignment, and player versus player preferences into battle instances. Think of a battle instance like a Battlefield 3 multiplayer session or a World of Tanks battle, with the key difference that The selection of players is done transparently and is in fiction.
Wow.
Can you please raise the amount of points
I was
that's
just
going to be?
going to-
I'm just going to jump forward to the part that's important for what we're talking about so that we don't sit here and listen to people. Let's say you've left a planet, right? You're flying along. Once you've plotted your nav course, and you would then engage autopilot and head towards your first waypoint in your destination. At this point, your encounter would be specified by the game server. So an NPC or live player are sorted on skill level, and also which important to all of you that, wait, what? And also which is important to all of you that like a more single player experience and don't want to deal with griefers based on your player versus player preference. So if you've set your game settings to be low PvP and you're in relatively safe space, you'll likely have an NPC encounter as opposed to a PvP one. That's the big sentence. If you've set your game settings to be low PvP, you'll likely have an NPC encounter as opposed to a PvP one. Now, thing is, they never say that there will be no PvP here. But they also then here say there will also be areas of the universe that no matter what your PvP setting is, will be PvP. So it's already a little confusing there. But I do think that generally, it seems they want there to be a sense of possible danger. They just wanted to give you the chance to say, can I be less about that life? And as we go forward, you're going to hear the devs talk kind of about how they wanted to include that idea in the game's design, but because they changed from instances to a server mesh environment where there weren't going to be separated instances of the game all over the place, they basically said, okay, well, we need to figure out how to do this geographically rather than through instances. And that's why they're talking about all this stuff. If you go to like the CitizenCon panel, that's why when they talk about their security, you can hear specifically they mention that like where the heck is that slide? The security that you encounter it's safe around planets. It's not even like a mid-security system is going to be completely safe everywhere. It's like you go to a really distant area in the back area of a star system, you might find less security response. You might find more danger like that. So going from that then, here is Chris talking about this PvP slider mechanic during and from the chairman.
Okay, so the PvP slider is an input to the game's matchmaking system to give it a hint of kind of like who it should be matching you with. So what happens is when you fly around in space, you have, you're in your worldview, your universe view, and the server up there is basically looking at where you are and is looking at everyone else and all their different machines and basically seeing where everyone else in the galaxy, and if it feels like, oh, there's someone close to you or there's an AI that's close to you, it basically would tell your local client, okay, this person's close to you and that person would be streamed into your instance, or that AI will be streamed into your instance. And so the PvP slider is essentially an extra variable for the matchmaking criteria. So the matchmaking criteria is on a whole bunch of things. So it's on things like ping, which is, obviously we don't want to be putting people together. There's a huge latency. It's on who's your friends, who's your enemies, who's your people of interest. It would have some level of skill rating in there, so we'll kind of sort of track it. Are you a new player or you're super experienced? And based on that, in most of the areas, because some areas there won't be any, it'll be whoever's there versus whether it's PvP or not. But if you basically said, hey, you know what, I would prefer to have more PvE than PvP, it would give a preference to the AI flying around rather than a real player. So if there's an AI pirate and there's a real player pirate, it would drop the AI pirate into your instance to fight if you were more towards PvE than PvP. You definitely would get other players stream into your space that wouldn't be hostile, say maybe a friend of yours or something, so you could definitely get a co-op kind of feeling. That's going to be an ongoing process, but the whole idea with it is you should be able to fly around the game, and if you wanted that more sort of privateer freelancer experience, that's kind of what will happen to you. It'll just be mostly you'll see AI, and then if there's other players, they'll be probably friendly players, or if you're in like certain areas of space where there's no holds bar, then it definitely could be a unfriendly player. But you sort of know that he uses the dangerous areas. So if you're a new player and you don't really want to be dealing with tough other players, then you probably should avoid those. And I would like to say one other thing is you definitely can have NPCs that are tougher than any player could ever be, since it's a computer that runs it. It knows exactly where
He definitely uses the probably words and mostly kind of things that like makes it sound like he wants to make people feel like they're going to be safe, but also be like, there's always going to be possibility of players.
You are, and it can calculate the correct firing solution much better than a player could ever do. So I think it is a bit of a misnomer to think that NPCs aren't necessarily as tough as real players. In some cases, NPCs could be tougher than real players. But
All right. So that's enough of that part. Let's jump forward now to something that Todd Pappy actually was sharing. This is 2020, I believe. Yeah, so this is much, much more recently. And this is when I go back to a lot because it really does describe what it looks like they are literally doing at the moment. He's going to talk about something like hotspots and stuff. And if you think about things like the Hathor locations, the ASD facilities we're going to go and play in today, Ghost Hollow, contested zones, it's kind of what he's describing here back in 2020.
Frankly, we don't want to do that. And with so they started, what system should I be in? What system where players want to be able to find the PvP versus where players don't want to find it. They want to focus more on PvE. I would start there. So they started, what system should I be in? What system, do I want to go to? And
if I'm in Terra, I probably should feel pretty safe. If I'm in Pyro, I should be looking over my shoulder.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So, and, with that, it basically comes down to, we'll never be able to 100%, guarantee, hey, you're 100% safe. And frankly, we don't want to do that. And
now, that actually doesn't sound too far off from what Chris is saying here with the way he's using his words.
Kind of feeling. That's going to be an ongoing process, but the whole idea with it is you should be able to fly around the game, and if you wanted that more sort of privateer freelancer experience, that's kind of what will happen to you. It'll just be mostly you'll see AI, and then if there's other players, they'll be probably friendly players, or if you're in like certain areas of
Mostly, probably. That's what I mean by like the way he's not using definitive words there.
And I would put it more on the scale of, let's say, 90 to 10, or, and maybe in a lawless area, it's the complete opposite. It's 10 to 90 kind of thing. So we never want it to be a 0. We never want it to be 100%. But even then in Stanton, we still want there to be areas for people to look for PvP. We still want there to be areas that are, mostly geared toward PvE. So it will really just depend on kind of how the player goes about looking for them. And then, are you turning off the monitored zones? Are you, basically out in the middle of nowhere? So, and if so, then I think it should happen there. Then we also obviously have like abandoned space stations and Jumptown and these
Korea, the hotspots.
Exactly. So we have certain hotspots, within the system that will.
So literally, it's why they made the asteroid facilities in Pyro.
I still think they're 100% valid, and that people should be able to go there and try that out.
It serves a double purpose. It attracts the people looking for it to those places, and it lets the people who want to avoid it avoid those places.
Yeah, exactly. And and ideally in the star map in the future, where you kind of see where like hotspots of of activity, and then that kind of can gear or at that point.
Arctic Wolf, literally what you said in chat. The hotspot of both danger in your star system and then also where PvP is taking place in the star system.
You can choose your route, with that information. So in the past, I know that we've talked about like a PvP slider, and we're not going to have anything that's player facing, but obviously for us as developers, we still want to be able to tune, how much, if the players are gearing more towards PvP, based off their actions, then that's more of the content that we would be pushing towards them, whether those be bounties or assassination missions or those types of things.
Okay.
But if the players are not geared towards that, then, that to me is basically their choices matter, in kind of the content that we're providing towards them and pushing, towards them. So, and then as far as, even just how the fights play out. So let's say you and I are fighting PvP, and let's say I have a warrant, for my arrest because I've been a bad boy, and you killed me, so therefore the reward that you're getting, for taking me out should be higher because you're going up against another player. Then you'll be able to, when physical inventory comes in, then anything that I'm carrying with me, you'll be able to take, and
Not for T0, Todd.
it might be in damage, or it might be in disrepair, or other things happen, during the fight, but it'll be up to you to choose if you want to take it or not. And so
You get the idea here. They talk about this stuff for a while, and then he goes to Rich. This was a good episode of Calling All Devs. I'll actually drop this in chat for you guys, because plenty of good info. But moving on from this, we then have Rich Dyer, talking about this next. They both occupied the same position at the company, just at different times. So that's not surprising. But he talks about kind of what the end game gameplay is. Now, real quick, let me see if I can find this line he has during this episode. And keep in mind, this is the guy who's running Star Citizen. So the one we were just listening to was the previous director of the game. This guy is the current director of the game. And you can see that there is definitely a trend of how the directors of this game want to make the game function in this regard. So I think they're going to stick to it.
All we see is what type of game is Star Citizen? And I've read many, many answers. It's a PvE game. It's a PvP game. What about non-combat? Ultimately, it's all three. 3 types of players, 1 universe. So how do we connect those players to create a cohesive game and not just a set of
with sandbox activities that force everyone to go kill each other. Right, guys? No, actually, it's this stuff. So he goes over the end game. This is the whole loop kind of that you're supposed to take part in as you earn stuff, missions, contracts, guilds, all that stuff. This is like the single player loop. We don't have to talk about that today. What we're going to talk about here is endgame content and how much of it is seemingly being made to fit all 3 of those styles of play you just mentioned.
and the main story. So let's collapse that for now. Let's talk about endgame content. The content that is designed for experienced players and keeps them engaged. Basically everyone in this room. So how does that look in 1.0? Firstly, we'll have open world content, including missions, group missions, and server-wide events, like we have today, but tailored to endgame players. While the sandbox element of Star Citizen will allow for large-scale battles, we also want to provide challenging instanced content.
So this is literally, I think, you're split between what people perceive to be the PvP game. I don't think you're going to encounter much PvP in the open world, but as people are categorizing it, I think this is your PvP, here's your PvE. All of the instance content, it's the R-Corp stuff, it's the fleet battles they're talking about here, it's even like the contested zones. They'll probably make versions of that are instance and can't be interrupted by other players that look a lot like the R-Corp sewers.
That will take full advantage of not only multi-crew ships, but fleets of ships. And you kind of know how we do that, right? You saw that yesterday. And as you progress through the guilds, you'll be able to accept high-level contracts from government agencies who will offer prototype and military blueprints as rewards. These missions will require the full coordination of multiple players and an assorted fleet of capital, support, and fighter ships. You will finally be able to become the admiral of the fleet, directing your armada from your hologlobe, which, yes, is a feature included in 1.0.
Now, what I think people are missing here is resource gathering, industrial and science-based gameplay in these instance locations, because people don't want to do them in the open world. To that, I say I'm sorry, but I think that that might have to be an arena commander kind of thing, or stay to safe systems sort of thing. We'll have to see how safe they can make safe systems.
on foot missions that see you enter the depths of distribution centers and municipal works in small, tight-knit squads that provide an outlet for our more FPS-focused players. On top of all this will sit a dynamic layer powered by StarSim. While StarSim will be the driving force in our dynamic economy, it will also track player and AI activity and dynamically spawn events based on their actions. For example, if it tracks large amounts of resources being moved from one home location to another, it will have a chance to spawn pirates to intercept. All this combined will provide just a portion of the endgame experience, and I'd love to delve deeper, but that's for another day, as we still have a lot to show. So we've discussed non-combat professions and guilds, cyclical gameplay loops, and endgame PvE content. But what about PvP? What about player versus player content?
Would you just
As you know,
wet themselves out there? Yeah. So yeah, we don't have to get into the rest of this, but that's really what I wanted to go over. This is just kind of a dive from the change that's hitting Dune and like why it's hitting Dune. I think is important. This is an end game location that had stuff in it that people couldn't get unless they went in and risked themselves. And for a game that has most of its content in locations that don't have PvP, I can understand why it's then jarring to have to enter a content area that is strictly PvP allowed. For Star Citizen, most of the area in the game offers PvP, so it's more like you're changing the default when you change that as opposed to that extra bit at the end of the end game, you know? And I think that what Star Citizen needs to hit, rather than changing their whole design, is making sure that this balance that he's introduced here, that they talk about here, is giving people a wide breadth of gameplay in both closed-off locations as well as out in the open world where there is risk, where the game does function on a dynamic economy that's tracking items and cargo and minerals and deaths and ships crashing, and all that stuff is adding into that StarSim system and changing the simulation. I think that was the most interesting part of Star Citizen from the beginning, was that it was like this wide connected world. And once you start breaking off portions of that into their own servers and star systems, it could get a little complicated. And I think because the game is made this way, it just might not work the same. I also like it's not a finished game. Let's give them a chance to see if they can make this system work and then go from there. I forgot to mention while recording that this is a little after edit. Obviously, most people don't believe what CIG says. I wouldn't say most people. A lot of people don't. And like that's because there's been a lot of things said and a lot of stuff that still hasn't happened. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen, but it's harder to trust that it will. We went over this with the social apps that we've been looking at. Planet Tech's got this, the security system, reputation, all these things have got this in Star Citizen. So like, obviously don't believe all this stuff until you see it. But I do think we should take a second to let the game try the system it's going for, even if it has taken forever, before we just kind of shoot it down. Now I'm done.